Once you have a partner and you have a platform, you know that you have a basic project and you have someone you're working with and you have a place where you know it's going to air, then you start to actually do the work. You start narrowing down, okay, who is going to be the voice of this project? What is the point of view? What is the story specifically we're trying to tell? We kind of know the macro, but who do we actually talk to? I'll give you a good example. We did a project with a production company called Critical Content that looked at the killings of Biggie and Tupac. So first you have an idea of, boy, wouldn't it be interesting to really look at the deaths of Biggie and Tupac 20 years after their killings. Both of those killings are unsolved. Those are interesting. That's the general ideas. Okay, but specifically now, who are we going to talk to? What is the actual story? We knew the title, we knew the basic gist, but how do we tell that story is kind of the next step. If you're going to do a character-driven story, you need a character. We call it casting, which I think is a really unpleasant word because it makes it sound very fake. But casting is not that. It really is just culling through all the people who could be the purveyors of your story, right? Whose point of view will we use to tell this story? I think you look for things across the board when you're going to cast a story. One, it's television, so that people need to be good on television, not necessarily attractive and the most articulate person in the world. That's not what I mean by good on television. It means they have to pop. They have to be interesting. They have to make you want to see more of them. And so there's not necessarily a type or a person or I wouldn't say, listen, what you need to find is a person who's 5'5", brown hair, brown eyes. That's always what works. It really is what's internal to the person, what pops about them, and how do they tell their own story. At the end of the day, how do they come across on camera? So the first thing we do is we put people on camera. We just throw them on camera. We ask them some questions, we set up cameras, and we really see how people come across on camera. In addition to how people come across on camera, you need to understand what their backstory is. What are the facts of their story? And do those facts match up to the story that you're trying to tell? We did a documentary about Black technologists who were trying to be founders of tech companies for a doc series I did called Black in America. We had 8 people in a house and we were going to follow them. One, we put them on camera to see, who we liked on camera. And then also, what was their backstory? How did they get there? What was the thing that they were developing in technology? How much access would they give us? Were they willing to be honest on camera? You can always tell when people are not, when they're spinning you a little bit. So in addition to how they come across on camera, you need to be able to get access to them. You need to make sure that you feel like they're being authentic, they're telling you the truth. And then also their backstory, the facts of their case, if you will, the facts of the story, I think are really, really important. So before you even sit down to interview someone, you just need tons of research. You want to know everything that they've done. At my company, we have a team of people who pull that research. So you really want to understand their backstory. You want to understand what's happening. You want to understand currently what they're going through. Just the basics. You want to know their basic path. How did they get to where they are? Some of the things that their friends have said, some of the things that their enemies have said, people who agree with you, people who disagree with you. You really want to get as much research as possible. I'm a big believer in reading in. I love to have more information. So I read absolutely every single thing about someone before I interview them. No one's going to sit down with you and just tell you every single thing, warts and all about their life. Your job as the interviewer is to know the backstory and to push people on the things that have worked out and the things that have not worked out. That's what's going to make your story dynamic. And listen, at the end of the day, the power and the responsibility is in the hands of the interviewer. It's your job. Everyone's going to pitch a perfect story to you all the time. It does not behoove them to tell you a story with ups and downs. They want it to be a perfect story. It started off great, it was great, it ended great. But really, the reality is it never does that. It's always a challenge. A good interviewer can figure out how to get to those challenges. One, by knowing them before you even enter the room to interview somebody, and two, by asking questions the right way so that people will feel comfortable in sharing some of those challenges with you. If you're talking to people about whom a lot is not known, then I would strongly suggest a pre-interview. And I would suggest a pre-interview that you don't do. Get somebody else to call in and just say, hey, we're going to be interviewing you next week. I'd love to ask you some questions. And that is usually a couple hour, 2 hours, just sit down. Where were you born? Tell me about your family. Tell me about your life. Every little detail, because usually from that pre-interview, you can gather some really interesting data, which will be used obviously in questions later. I did an interview with Andrew Young, the ambassador to the UN in the past, who was one of Martin Luther King's best friends. And he has told the story of the night Dr. King was assassinated a million times in the time that since Dr. King was killed. And I remember I sat down with him, we did a 3-hour interview, and I started with, tell me about the night Dr. King was killed. And he started going through the same story, but partly because we had spoken for probably 2 hours beforehand, he was kind of less rote, he just was more thoughtful about it. And in the middle of our interview, he started to cry. And I asked him about how he perceived that. And he said, in all my time, I have never done anything as important as that. I mean, it was really a remarkable interview for a guy who has told that story 1,000 times, maybe more than 1,000 times. We were able to get to the real emotion of that moment in a way I think that other people had not. Some of it was, we wore him down. We just talked for 2 hours, right? So after a couple of hours, people can't just keep up a facade. They have to, now you're really talking to them. So some of it is just to wear people down so that they start having real answers to your questions. Some of it was, we spent so much time digging into his memories that I think he felt like he was really being forced to call up things from his past and remember them.